Samach Beis Amar Aleph. The last thing we learned was about the importance of the more people being involved in the mitzvah, the better it is. And we're discussing the laws of Tnufa, of waving, and we're talking about on Shavuos. They brought a whole series of kabbanas, 7 lambs as a korban oila, but they also brought 2 lambs, which are like a shlamim, together with the 2 loaves of bread. So, says the Gemara, about 10 lines on the top of the page, or up to the 2 dots. Shtei halechem, the 2 loaves of bread, vishnei kivsei hatzeres, and so too with the 2 lambs. And they did a tnufa. They did a tnufa while the animal was alive, and then they did another tnufa waving when the animal is dead. So says the Gemara, how exactly are you meant to do the waving? Does the bread go on top of the lamb, underneath the lamb? We'll soon see there are 4 different opinions. What have we learned? In the pasuk itself, there seems to be an apparent contradiction. The pasuk says that the heini v'koyin oisam nishweir alechem habikurim. In other words, you take the 2 lambs and you place them above the bread, on top of the bread. So Yaakov, if you take it literally, you should take the sheep and lambs and put them on top of it. And the pasuk then continues, waving before Hashem, and there it says al shnei kavasim, that the bread goes on top of the lambs. So which one is it? The lambs are on top of the bread, or the bread on top of the lambs? If we take the pasuk literally on top of the lambs, so the bread should be on top of it. But the pasuk begins that the lambs go on top of the lechem bekurim. So which one is it? The Torah is making them both equal. Then we don't know. Are the loaves of bread above the lambs, or in kvasim are the lambs above the bread? Is mamatzinu bechol makom. Generally speaking, where do we find in other places when you have a korban and you have bread? Lechem l'mayla, the matzah, the bread is above it. Is avkan here too? Lechem l'mayla, the bread is above it. Heicha, where do you? He said everywhere we say. Where else do you find it? So he says, where? Amar papa b'miluyim. You find it by the miluyim when they did the inauguration of the Mishkan. Over there, also the matzahs were on top of the lamb. So therefore, the bread goes on top. Now we're going to see there are actually 4 opinions. So that's opinion number 1. The bread is on top of the lambs. Rabbi Yosi ben Hamshulam says, interesting name, Hamshulam. So it's Rabbi Yosi ben Meshulam. Hamshulam is the Meshulam. Who is the Meshulam? Anyway, he says, no, the kavasim are actually lamayla. The bread is beneath, and the lambs are on top of it. And that is mani mekama shnei kvasim. So the pasuk is clearly that the bread should be on top of the kvasim. We just said the 2 halves of the pasuk. Lahoitzi shiva. Remember, there were 7 other lambs that were brought with other kabbanas, a par and aisle for them with the lechem, but those are oilis. So he wants to tell you that those 7, there's no waving. It's only these 2 that have the waving. Chanina ben Chachinoi. Chanina ben Chachinoi. He has a 3rd opinion. He says, Maniach, he plays, Shtei halechem bein yar choisei and shal kavasim. You do as he says, I can reconcile the pasuk that it should be above the lamb and beneath the lamb at the same time. How? They lie the lambs down sideways on their sides, and you lift one leg and you place the bread on the thigh. You place the bread on the thigh. Between the top leg and the bottom leg. So it's above the bottom leg, but beneath the top leg. So it's above the kvasim and beneath the kvasim. And Rashi clearly says here, I'll come back to it in a minute. Now you can reconcile 2 psukim. Lechem agabi kvasim, the bread is above the lambs, the kvasim agabi lechem, the lambs are above them. 1 leg below and 1 leg above. Amar Rebbe disagrees. If the melech bosav adam ain't noisy, we don't do this before a human mortal. If the melech bosav we do it for the Rebbe. It's so disrespectful. I mean, also you have to wonder. You have to eat the bread. How in the world can you eat it afterwards? But anyway, so he said a 4th opinion. So far we have 1 opinion that the animals go above the bread. The other opinion is the bread goes above the animals. 3rd opinion is the bread is above 1 leg beneath the other leg. And Rebbe says it's not above or below. It's side by side. If you side by side and you wave. Habina al, but the Torah clearly says al, on top of. Rav Chizah says to Rav Hamnuna, and others say the other way around. The others say Rav Hamnuna said Rav Chizah. Rebbe is of the view that al doesn't necessarily mean above. Al can mean adjacent. Rebbe Tamed Dami is Albus Jason. Where did he say that? The time we learned regarding the lechem haponim, the 2 rows of 6 bread, and you have to place on top of that the levoina, that frankincense, and the bazich and the keli. Was it on top of the bread or on the side of the bread? So it says in the passage, "Sata al hamareches levoina zaka." Sounds like it's on top of it. It says al, and Rebbe says al means besamach, adjacent to it. After Amazon says adjacent al bamash above. Kishwoim it says besachoise. We read in today's parsha, actually Shvi. It says that you should cover the oren or separate the oren with the pareiches. It says al. Sounds like the pareiches was on top of the oren, but it wasn't. This pareiches was a curtain that separated the kodesh hakadoshim from the kodesh inside the Beis Hamikdash. Yet it says al. How the al means besamach next to. Now Rashi clearly says that this waving that we're talking about, and remember, by these kavasim of Shavuos, they waved it with the bread before, and they waved it, while the animal was alive, and they did it again when the animal was dead. Rashi says that this whole Gemara is talking about uba oidon chayin kamaidi. At least that opinion that says was done between the 2 legs is while the animal was still alive. So in other words, it seems from Rashi, what happens when the animal is dead? It seems from Rashi that this whole machlekes that we're so particular where the bread was, the position of and the animal, is only talking about when the animal was alive, that first waving. The second waving, we don't really care how it was. You had to wave it, but you didn't care how it was. And what's the logic of that? So although Brisker explains on the Rambam, his Pirush on the Rambam, he explains that according to Rashi, the first base, the first waving is a special, unique din that you find by the communal shlamim, which is on Shavuos. On the private shlam that a person brings, you don't wave it while the animal is still alive. So this is a special din, and therefore, as a Shavuos carbon, the Torah is very particular on how it's done and how you wave it. After the animal is dead, you have to wave it again. According to Rashi, now the reason why you wave it is because it's a regular carbon shlamim. And as a carbon shlamim, you have to wave it. Now, in a normal carbon shlamim, there's no particular halacha how the bread has to be, okay, not bread, but there's no halacha how the waving has to be done. So the same thing here, that we don't care. The Rambam, however, learns that no, it goes in both, because he holds that even the second shlamim waving is not a din of shlamim, rather, it's a din in the special carbon of Shavuos, and therefore there's no difference while the animal's alive, the animal's dead. The same kind of waving, whatever it says here, the 4 different opinions, that's how it's done. It is very difficult to imagine in practical terms, how do you have the 2 lambs sitting on top of the bread without smash, and you lift them with your hands, that they don't get smashed? I'm not sure exactly. Anyway, let's continue. Further, what do? You go forward, backward, and up and down. There are 2 possible reasons why you do it. Reason number 1, maybe you bring it back and forth. You're saying that the Eibishter who runs to all the 4 corners of the world is Maila. So you're having him in mind, and Maila you go up and you go down. So the Eibishter again, who the heavens and earth belong to him. In Israel, even another reason altogether. It's not just a testament to our faith; it's actually it's a supplication, it's a prayer, and that is it said name Rabbi Chanina, the reason why we go back and forth, to hold back, to restrain the terrible winds, the terrible climatic conditions, hurricanes, and all that, and to prevent halalim roim, the bad dews. I'm not exactly sure what is a tal ra. What's a bad dew? We know that rain, it could be horrible and it could cause so much harm and damage. But what's a bad dew? I'm not sure. We'll come back to all this in a minute. From here, you learn out, we glean the following interesting thing. If you don't do any waving, you still fulfilled the mitzvah of the carbon. It was still effective. So we refer to the waving as the remnants of the mitzvah. Here we'll call it shiori mitzvah, the leftover of the mitzvah. In Sukkah we call it machshiri mitzvah, enhancing the mitzvah. So Zoysim we learn out that shiori mitzvah ma'akvin zaparonius, that shiori mitzvah also prevents any bad things from happening. The Tanufa Sheyare Mitzvah, Tanufa is the leftover of the mitzvah, right? We just said, and you look how effective it is that he can prevent these terrible, horrible winds and damaging winds with talim roim and the bad dews. Amar Rabba says Rabba, the same thing applies to lulav, that we shake in all directions, and it's a prayer, it's a supplication that it shouldn't have bad winds and bad dews. And it's also machshiri mitzvah, the leftover of the mitzvah. Rabbi Yaakov would take the lulav and take it, draw it out, and then bring it back to him. And he would show it, he would demonstrate it. He would say, that this should be an arrow in the eyes of the Satan. In other words, I'm antagonizing the Satan. I'm taunting the Satan. You see, you can't stop us from doing mitzvahs. Says the Gemara, it's not a good idea. Because you're taunting the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara usually wins. So don't tease him. From this little section here, we learn out an interesting halacha. The Gemara talks about waving and the lulav is during Hallel. The whole Gemara in Sukkot Daf Lamed Zayin Lamed Ches is only talking about Hallel, which Nohoidul Hashem, the parts that you wave the lulav. Nowhere does it say in the Gemara that you have to wave the lulav when you make a bracha the first time every day. The lulav and esrig after the bracha, you should go and shake it in all directions. It doesn't say that anywhere. So how do we know? Why should we do it? It's only do by Hallel. We learn it from this little piece here. Rabbi Yaakov said the words Gira be'ena de sitna. Now, if it was the middle of Hallel, you're not allowed to make a hefsek. You're not allowed to interrupt. So how did he say those words? Must be it wasn't the middle of Hallel. So when else was it? Must be when he was making the bracha. So from here we learn out, the Goinim say, from here you learn out that when you make the bracha on the lulav and esrig, you actually have to wave it as well. Now, in the Gemara, it says clearly, maybe, which means you go out and you go in. That's it. So only two directions. And a number of Rishonim hold, when we shake the lulav, we're talking about the lulav as well as the waving of the animal, because the Gemara says, the lulav. All you have to do is go forward and back, and up and down. That's it. That's one view. Rashi clearly says over here, in the Rashi, he says you go to the tzafim, which is, if you're facing east, which many poskim hold you have to, with tzafim you go to the right, then you go to the left, you go forward, backward. Rashi clearly says all four directions. What's also interesting is, in Minig Ashkenaz, you do the 4 points to the compass, and Minig Rizal, you do right, left, forward, up and down and then back, which is more or less what Rashi says over here. So Rashi holds the four directions, other Shem hold them two. And the Rosh says the most fascinating thing. The Rosh says the basis, the Rosh and Sukkah, he says the basis for the authorities that say that you should only do it two directions and not four is because you know what bothers them? If you go in all four directions, and not the Ashkenaz way, which is the 4 points of a compass, but you do it the Sfard way, which is seems of the Rishonim, that's how everyone did it. You go right to the left and then forward and backward. You're creating a cross, a crucifix, and you're not allowed to do that. That's what they say the problem is. However, so the Rosh therefore says they're wrong, because when it's considered a crucifix, if they would go forward and backward and then up and down, then you created a vertical crucifix. But if you did it all horizontal, like one-dimensional, that's not a cross. And anyway, the Rosh says we do it in 6 directions. We do all the 4 corners, and then we go up and down. So there's no real cross here. And the Rosh goes ahead and he proves. Oh, there's another argument. Is the shaking and the going back and forth, to and fro, 2 separate mitzvahs, or is it one and the same? There are a number of Rishonim that hold that when we say you need nenuyim, by the lulav, you have to have nenuyim, which we translate as shaking, doesn't mean what you think it means shaking like we do. It means when you go out and back, that in itself is the nenua. That's what the nenuyim are. There's no shaking at all. That's what they hold. Other Rishonim, the Rishva has a whole lengthy thing there in Sukkot. Other Rishonim hold that know that nenuyim and what we do, Melech HaMevi, are 2 separate things. Melech HaMevi, but you also have to have nenuyim, either on both ends, or at least when you bring it back to yourself. You have to shake it as well. And the Rosh I bring a proof. And the proof is very simple. How tall does a lulav have to be? 4 tefach. 3 is the minimum for the stem, but you need 1 more tefach in order to be able to shake it. So we see clearly from here, it's not just a question of drawing it back. You have to physically shake the lulav. So the Meiri says, that's no proof at all. Very interesting what he says. The Meiri says that if you're right, that you need to shake it, and your whole proof is why you need an extra tefach. So tell me, he says to the Rosh, explain to me why is it? If you have a lulav that's only 3 tvachim tall, you're not yotze. It has to be 4 tvachim tall. In other words, according to you, you need to be able to shake it. And yet the law is that if you didn't shake the lulav, it's still kosher. It's still kosher. How come? How come if you have to shake it? So it proves you don't have to shake the lulav at all. It has to be able to be shaken. Kol hara lebila ain't bila ma'keves boy. If it's suitable, like by the Karm Mincha we said, you have to be able to stir it, even though you don't have to stir it. So it has to be not more than 60 Australian, because then you're no longer capable. As long as you can do it. So 4 tvachim, as long as the size, it's only describing the size of the lulav that you can shake it, but you don't have to shake it at all. So that's another argument between the Rishonim. There are actually quite a few arguments there. The Marsha says very nicely in Sukkah again, he says that the 2 loaves of bread represent the 2 luchas, and the 4 corners that we're sending to is to say that the purpose of Torah is that we should disseminate Torah to all the 4 corners of the world. And that's why you have to take the bread with the lambs and shake it all 4 directions to say that this is the purpose of Torah. Any corner of the world should be filled with Torah. Okay, back to the Gemara over here on the bottom of the first white line. Panu Rabbanan, we learned an interesting argument. The Zivchei Shal Metzibur. The Zvachim, the carbon Shal Metzibur, which is the kvasim you bring on Shavuos. To unin to ufa. Now we know that you have to wave it when it's alive. The pasuk clearly says so, but you also have to wave it a second time after you shechted it, and that we glean from a carbon shlamim. And the question is, how far do we take it? Does it have to replicate the carbon shlamim in entirety, or just a principle that you wave it and then we custom make it for its carbon? Why are we asking? Because by a carbon shlamim, most of that flesh, and all the flesh is eaten by the owners, and the chazeh and the sheik, which is the breast and the thigh, is what you give to a kohen, and that's the only parts that are waved. So when it comes to the carbon kavasim, after you shechted it, and we learn from shlamim that you have to wave it, do we wave the entire animal, or we only wave the chazeh and the sheik? So we have an interesting argument between Rebbe and the Rabbanon. Does the Gemara tell you have to wave it after you shecht it? But to son and you have Rebbe says you wave the entire animal just like you did when it's alive. You do it now when it's dead. And the Chachamim say no. You do exactly like a shlamim, only wave the chazay and the sheik. He's been making what's the argument? They're arguing the principle that we learned on a number of occasions, and that is bedoin mina umina. Do we say when you learn B from A, it's exact replica of A, or bedoin mina, we learn the principle from A, but then ba'uki basra, and then we tailor make it to wherever you're trying to learn. That's the argument. Rabbanan, can we forget? Rabbanan, so we learn from there. It has exactly mazi kashami yochid. When it comes to karban shlamim to nitru falach shchita, you have to wave it after you shechted it. Avziv kashama tzibur to falach shchita. This is also considered shlamim, even though it's a communal, a tzibur, and you do the same thing. You wave the chazay and the sheik. Umina, and from there, ma hasam bechazay v'sheik. Just like by the karban shlamim, all you did was the chazay v'sheik. You follow it exactly. Avochanam bechazay v'sheik. However, Rebbe says, doin mina, but v'uki basra. Now you customize it for here. So too when it comes to the carbon sham tzibur, to unin truf, you have to wave it after the shchita. That's that, right? So you learn that principle. V'uki basra. Now you custom make it. Tailor make it for the carbon now over here. Of here is different because the entire animal gets eaten. There's no special maton of the chazay. The entire animal goes to kainin. Over there, since over here you also waved it when it was alive, and when it was alive, it was obviously the entire animal. So even though now it's geshachtin, you're waving it again, entire animal. That's so they're arguing on that very principle. However, there are Amoraim who argue which principle is correct. So each Amoida is going to try to interpret the machlekes to suit their opinion. First, we have Rapapa. Papa says, I believe the Kuliyama Daimina Umina. Everyone holds that when you learn B from A, it has to be exactly like A. So what's going on here? Now it makes sense to Rabbanan that only the Chazay v'Shaik you have to wave. So why does Rebbe hold you wave the entire animal? They have to be exactly like the source. which are shlamim. He says it is exactly like the source. You know why? What's the logic why the shlamim, the only parts of the shlamim you wave is the chazay and the sheik? Because that is what goes to the kohen, and the kohen are representing Hashem, and therefore you wave that. Well, in the carbon of Shavuos, what goes to the kohen? The entire animal. So therefore we have to wave the entire animal. It's exactly like the shlamim. The high time that Riki Hashem, like over there, Ma Hasan Davar Shematala, give to the kohen, I'll give to the kohen. Ravina says, no, I rule the Kuli Alma Doimina Uki Basra. You learn the principle from there, and then you basically transfer to the second one according to the second one. So therefore, it makes sense why Rebbe says that it has to be the so there's Uki Basra. So l'chayda, Rabbanan, the Rebbe makes sense that over here it's a bit different than the entire animal because it makes sense. But what's the svar of the Rabbanan? How come they say only the chazay b'sheik? Over here the entire animal goes to the kohenim. So the Gemara answers, behind the entire Rabbanan we have a pasuk. When it comes to the shlamim of the yachid, it says in the pasuk over there that you should wave the chazay and the sheik. I took it from the Eden to give it to them, and it says there, and I took mezivchei shalmehem. From their shlamim, it says in plural. There's only one kind of shlamim. Just say zichei shlamim. Why shalmehem? Because there are two kinds of shlamim. There's private and communal, and both of them have the same din. That only the chazay and the sheik get waved, as the pasuk says. Ribuyu, it's a ribuyu. Now the Mishnah then said, Rab Shimon came along and said in the Mishnah that there are three karbanos, specific karbanos, and there are three mitzvahs. The three mitzvahs are smicha, leaning on the animal. There's a waving while the animal's alive, a waving while the animal's dead. There are three different karbanos, and each karban only has two out of the three of those mitzvahs. And what are these three specific karbanos? Three karbanos require three mitzvahs, but each one only has two of them. And they don't have the third one. Which are the three karbanos we're highlighting? One is zivchei shal meyachid, a karban shlamim. One is zivchei shal mitzibur, the karban shvuos. And the third one is Hasham Mitzayra, the carbon ashram, the guilt offering that a Mitzayra brings. Zivchei Sham Yachi to Unin Smicha, the carbon shlamim of an individual requires Smicha Chayim. While the animal's alive, you have to lean on the animal, number one. And number two, while the animal's alive, you don't wave it, but to Shchutin, and you also have to wave it once it's geschachten, the Chazay and the Sheik. But the Ein Behen Tenufas Chayim, but you don't wave it while the animal's alive. On the other hand, Zivchei Shalmei Tzibur, the shlamim, the communal shlamim, is very different. To Unin, you have to wave it Truvas Chaim when it's alive, not like an ordinary shlamim. And Shchuti, when the animal is dead, and that we glean from an ordinary shlamim. But the Ein Behem Smicha, there is no smicha. Now the Gemara is going to try to ask both the directions. Let's say logically, let's learn one from another and add one of these mitzvahs. So, for example, we'll get to back in a second. And Asham, no, the deficient mitzvah, let's add it on because let's make a kavachaymer from the other ones that have other stringencies, so or other leniencies, and they still have this stringency. So surely this one should have that stringency, but we'll see in a minute. Asham Mitzvah, the third animal, which is the guilt offering of a Mitzvah, there, Toman Smicha requires Smicha like a Shlamim, and it also needs waving, but only when it's alive. But the aim of a shachar, there's no waving once the animal is dead. Exactly the opposite of Shlamim. Says the Gemara, now that we've established that Zivchei Shalom Yachid, you have smicha and you wave while the animal is dead, let's also wave it when the animal is alive. Because it's stricter than the carbon shvuos, because it needs smicha, and the carbon shvuos, you wave it when it's alive, so surely a Shlamim, you should also wave it when it's alive. So we're asked, the Zivchei Shalom Yachid tuna trufa chayim, mekavachayim, from logic. Doesn't require chayim, doesn't require when it's alive. Yet you have to wave when it's alive. So zivchei shalma yachid, which is stricter. Shatun is min chayim, you have to lean on it when it's alive. Ein adin surely shatun trufa chayim, you should also wave when it's alive. Says the Gemara, Miyet Rachmana Gabe Zivchei Shalmei Tzibur. We have a special pasuk which restricts a certain din that only applies to Shalmei Tzibur. That is the waving when it's alive. Because how do we know that? Because it says there that the kohen should wave oisam, these two animals, on the bread. We mean oisam them. We just say we know what we're talking about. Only these animals, but not others. Which ones are we excluding? The carbon shlamim. Exclude the shlam of the yachid. Says Gemara, fine. So now let's do the converse. The year zivche shal mitzibur. So let's say that the communal shlamim should have smicha. Because it's stricter than the private shlamim because you need to waive it when it's alive. So surely it should have smicha. Mazivche shal miyachid doesn't need waiving alive. To the smicha requires to lean. Zivche shal mitzibur should it does have to be waived until alive. Ain't surely to the smicha should have a smicha. But Ravina Gemiri, we have a tradition. We learned that shtei smichas b'tzibur. There are only two kabbanas, communal kabbanas, that require leaning on, and those two, and therefore this is which two kabbanas? One is a par helam davar shel tzibur. The community relied on the dayanim, the thinking that something is mutter, and they made a mistake. So you bring one par for tzibur, it needs smicha. And the other one is the seir hamishtalech, and Yom Kippur one gets thrown off the cliff. Also needs smicha. It says v'samach aron shtei yodov. Okay, so now I'm going to ask the last one. The asham mitzayra, the asham mitzayra, told Tnifa should waive it shachar after it was shachar in the kabbalah. Logic. Ma ziv chisham yochid shlamim. So ain't to un in Tnufas chaim. You don't waive it when it's alive. Yet to un smicha, to un Tnufa shchut. Sorry, requires Tnufa waiving after it's geschachten. So asham mitzayra that has Tnufas chaim, you waive it when it's alive. Ain't it? Surely you should tone Tnufa shachar. You should waive it after geschachten. Says the Gemara again. We have a pasuk. Mir Rachmana Gavzil Shama Yochid. When it talks about Shama Yochid, in the pasuk the Yoda to the end, he brings it the fats and the Chaza the end. You should bring it. It says over there Lahonif Oisai. Oisai is very limiting. Oisai Lemutya Shama Tzera. Only you wave after your shachten. Only a Shama Yochid, not the Asham Tzera. Tell me, we learned. 5 people brought one carbon. You can't have all 5 doing a waving. You only have one person. Otherwise, 5 different hands. It comes a chatzitza intersecting, and also practically it's very difficult. The Isha woman that cannot go into that section of the base of English, so Kohen mainly the Kohen does it on her behalf. It seems like, remember we discussed this in argument Rashi and other Rishonim. The Rashi says that the woman, the Kohen is acting as an agent for the woman. And the other Rishonim say, if she doesn't have the mitzvah, how can you appoint an agent? So they learn the Kohen is doing it for himself. And that's the modus operandi of that particular carbon. The wording here, V'isha Kohen meinif al yoda, that the Kohen does it on her behalf, sounds like it's as an agent. Not just he's the one who'll do truth and that's good enough. The last one is somebody sends a kabbalah from overseas. And and the Gemara says we're in Gittin that we assume the person is alive. Kohen meinif al yoda, the Kohen does it on his behalf. We're going to learn till the next mission because it's pretty quick, and that we did that in Mizrahi today as well. If somebody, there's 5 kinds of mincha. 2 of them are with a frying pan. One is shallow, one is deep. If somebody says, "Harei alai b'machas," I'm going to bring a mincha that's the shallow one. Lo yavi macheshes. Don't bring the one in the deep one, memacheshes. From the way Rashi explains, even though I don't think that's how everybody else explains, Rashi explains top. It sounds exactly like a walk. Rashi said, I'm just quoting Rashi now, the top line. Shakli amuk. It's a very deep pan. All the oil is concentrated in one place. If it's just a flat pan with high walls and you have a lot of oil in there, then the oil's not concentrated in one place. It's throughout the entire pan. It seems like a walk where there's a cone on the bottom and it's just. And it all gravitates there, and it's very the oil bubbles very quickly, and so the machesh is it bubbles up, and when you touch the mincha, it causes the oil to bubble up. So that is a marcheshes. So if you made a promise, I'm going to bring a mincha machmas, don't bring a marcheshes or machesh le machmas. You can't alternate. Whatever you said, that's the kind of mincha you have to bring. Ma bein machmas le machesh. What is the difference between the two? So we have an argument tonight. What I just told you was the second opinion. Machesh is opinion number 1. Yesh lekisa, it has a cover. And machmas ain't lekisa. A pot when it has a cover, the entire thing gets cooked much better and becomes softer. If it has no cover, it sort of fries and becomes tough. That's the words of Rabbi Sagluli. Rabbi Chanim Gamliel says macheshes is amuka, the way we just explained. Macheshes is very deep, but maaser and it bubbles up. And machmas is sofa, flat, maaser kosher. And therefore, the end product is tough. Says the Gemara, my time Rabbi Yossi. Where does Rabbi Yossi get this idea of having a lid, not having a lid? In other words, obviously it's the word itself, marchesh, the machvas, that sort of identifies the kind of a keli it is. So it comes along the Rabbi Yossi, and he said, the Gemara is trying to work out what his reason is. Ilaim, is it because the word marcheshes, he thinks that the word marcheshes, the asya comes from chushi halev, that it comes from the idea that the thoughts of your heart, and the purpose of the mincha is like an atonement. And you had hirhure ha'avera, and where do you find the word marcheshes means to think of your heart? Because it says rochash libi davatay, my heart for good things, even though the pasuk says good things. Marcheshes of mincha is an atonement, so it's my heart, and things that are in your heart nobody else knows. It's concealed. So that idea is having a pot with a lid on it. It's concealed, and machvas comes from the word. The asya marbuya peh, that which is revealed from your mouth, things which you say. Like people say, your lips are moving, and therefore everybody can find these same words in different things. In fact, the opposite. If I said the opposite, machvas, I can say the asir achbuyalev. Machvas can be thoughts of your heart, which means that the machvas should have a cover on it, which is concealed. It says, Lavan reprimanded Yaakov, Lama nichbeisa livroich. Why did you hide from me? And he used the word machvas, nichbeisa, and that's concealing from me. And marcheshes, I can find you a word that's revealed. The asya archushe means revealed. Menachos says lips are moving. It must be Gemara Gemara. This is how we heard what each one is. Rabbi Chanina Marcheshes is amuka is very deep. The chsiv is at the pasuk. Look at the pasuk. It says the whole mincha that you make nas it's made ba marcheshes, inside the marcheshes. Right, and up the chsiv, because when it comes to the mincha that's in the machmas, it says va'al machmas, above the machmas. So obviously, the machmas is very shallow fried, and marcheshes is very deep fried. He says, I'm not sure if marcheshes is describing the kind of flour offering, so it's a word for flour offering, but it was made in a marcheshes, or marcheshes is actually the name of the vessel. And if you want to donate a carbon mincha, you should of marcheshes, you have to say minchas marcheshes, or at least say I'm bringing what's inside the marcheshes. But if you use the word marcheshes, all I'm saying is I'm going to donate this deep frying pan, this wok. Which one is it? Probably learned. Rishame says, I'm going to take a parmesan. He has to now wait. He doesn't have a clue what he has to do. It doesn't matter what you thought. It's the words that you said. Misapklu, what Bishame's doubt was, is Marcheshes describing the vessel, or Al Shum Masein was describing the flour offering that goes in this vessel. And Basil disagreed. Basil says, Kli Hayim Mikdash is actually describing the vessel. There was a Keilim Mikdash called a Marcheshes, Shema V'doime, and it was similar. Kimin Kalbus Omuk. Kalbus is like a U-shaped Keli, and Ukeshabatzek Muna B'toich, when you have dough inside it, Doime Kimin Tapuchia Barzim, it's like these apples of Barzim. I'm not exactly sure what Barzim is, and Kimin Beluta Evanim. And something there you've on it. But the idea is, if you look at the picture here, which is totally different than what Rashi says, but you see all these holes, it sounds like it had this big, deep U-shaped, he's still like a walk, but a U-shaped keli, a lot of oil in it, and it had a lot of holes, so the dough got stuck into these holes, and that's how you made these challahs. Let's make a number of challahs. That's how you made the challahs. So it describes a vessel. And therefore the pasuk says, "Kol nase b'macheshes," inside the macheshes, which means macheshes is describing a vessel. The al machvas, and on the machvas, alma is on top of this keli called machvas. Alma al shem hakelim nikru. It's definitely describing the vessels. The loyal shema same, not describing the kind of activity. So he said, I have no doubt if you said I'm donating a marcheshes to the base of English, you meant you're donating them this wok or this U-shaped keli, not a carbon mincha. We'll stop here tomorrow. Mitzvah Shem. Have a good walk, everybody. Have a shul talk.